Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The calm before the storm. Amara Reynolds sat in her sleek, modern office on the 42nd floor of the Orion Tech building, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The San Francisco skyline, bathed in the warm hues of the early morning sun, stretched before her, a testament to the years of hard work and sacrifice she had invested in her journey. 5 years had passed since she first stepped into the CEO role, and yet, the view never failed to take her breath away. She took a slow sip of her coffee, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the final details of a presentation she had been preparing for months. Today, everything would come together. Orion Tech's new AI processing chips, the product of years of research and development, were finally ready to be presented to a major investor. This deal had the potential to revolutionize the tech industry, making AI more accessible to smaller companies and fueling a new wave of innovation. Amara knew that success was never guaranteed. Every day, she fought against doubters, those who questioned her capabilities simply because of her gender, her race, or her background. She had been the only woman in her computer science classes, the only black face in a sea of privilege. But she had never let that stop her. If anything, it had fueled her determination to prove herself. Every milestone she reached was a reminder of how far she had come. From coding in her parents' garage to standing on the verge of a breakthrough that could change the world. The phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her out of her reverie. It was Marco, her trusted helicopter pilot, confirming the pre-flight check for the Bell 429 she had bought last year. The helicopter had become a symbol of her success, not just because of the luxury it represented but because it reflected her determination to live life on her own terms. Bay Area traffic had always been a nightmare, and when time-sensitive meetings called, the idea of wasting precious hours in gridlock was unacceptable. Some of the board members had raised their eyebrows at the expense of the helicopter, but Amara knew it would pay for itself. The time saved meant more deals closed, more opportunities seized. Miss Reynolds, her assistant, Tony, knocked softly at the door, poking his head inside. "Your bag is packed and ready to go. I included the backup drives, extra chargers, and those protein bars you like." "Thanks, Tony." "You're a lifesaver," Amara replied, flashing him a quick smile. She stood up and adjusted her navy blazer. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the framed photos of her journey, a snapshot from her MIT graduation day, a picture from the humble office where Orion Tech had been founded with just 3 employees, and a cover of Time magazine featuring her as one of the most influential figures in tech. Each frame reminded her of the late nights spent coding, the investors who doubted her, and the countless barriers she had broken. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent, just the soft hum of the elevator and the steady beat of her pulse. It was early, still quiet in the building, and she liked it that way. In the lobby, the security guard, Joe, gave her a warm smile as she walked past. "Big day today, Miss Reynolds?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of admiration. "Aren't they all, Joe?" Amara responded with a wink. The exchange had become a small but meaningful ritual. Joe had been one of the first employees to treat her like she belonged, long before the company had grown into the powerhouse it was today. Outside, the black Tesla that was always waiting for her pulled up. Keith, her driver, stepped out and opened the door. She slid into the back seat, grateful for the quiet comfort of the car. The soft leather seats and the gentle classical music playing in the background created the perfect environment for her to review her presentation one last time. The drive to the heliport would take about 20 minutes, giving her just enough time to go over everything. Her tablet was already out, and she started flipping through the slides. The technology was solid, the market research comprehensive, and the financial projections, conservative but impressive. The numbers spoke for themselves, but she knew the presentation mattered just as much. In her experience, investors often cared more about how you presented yourself than what you were actually presenting. She had learned that lesson the hard way early in her career when she had to constantly prove herself in rooms where people were more focused on her age, gender, and race than on the potential of her ideas. Amara's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mom. "Knock 'em dead, baby girl. Dad's making his lucky chicken for dinner to celebrate." Amara smiled, typing back a quick response, "Thanks, Mom. I'll make sure to bring home some good news." Her parents had always been her biggest supporters, even when they didn't fully understand what she did. The tech world had been foreign to them, but their pride in her accomplishments had never wavered. It meant more to her than any industry award or magazine cover. The car pulled up to the heliport, and Amara could already see the familiar sight of her helicopter waiting on the tarmac. Its sleek white exterior gleamed in the morning sun, reflecting the light like a beacon of her success. She allowed herself a brief moment of pride before focusing on the tasks at hand. The helicopter was more than just a mode of transportation, it was a symbol of how far she had come. Tony had packed her favorite breakfast sandwich, and she ate it while running through her mental checklist. Everything was set. The presentation would start at 11 a.m., giving her plenty of time to make any last-minute adjustments. She was in control, as always. As she sipped her coffee and finished her sandwich, her thoughts wandered briefly. She remembered a time not so long ago when she was just a young woman trying to break into a male-dominated field. There were times when she doubted herself, when the weight of the challenges seemed almost too much to bear. But those moments were few and far between. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her abilities, and to silence the voices of doubt. And now, here she was, on the cusp of another major achievement. Miss Reynolds, a young woman, approached her table hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say that you're such an inspiration. I'm starting my own tech company, and seeing your success means a lot." Amara smiled warmly. She remembered what it was like to be in that young woman's shoes, filled with dreams and uncertainty. "What's your company working on?" Amara asked, genuinely curious. The woman, grateful for the attention, explained her startup's focus on sustainable energy solutions. They chatted briefly about the challenges of entrepreneurship, and Amara gave her a piece of advice she wished she had received when she was starting out. "Have your team send over a pitch deck," Amara said, passing along her business card. "We're always looking for promising partnerships." At that moment, Marco appeared, signaling that it was time. "We're ready when you are, Amara. Everything's checked and double-checked." Gathering her things, Amara stood and adjusted her blazer. Tony appeared as well, always seemingly in the right place at the right time, offering to help with her bags. "Making your superhero entrance again?" he teased, referring to the way she often arrived at meetings in the helicopter. "You know, some CEOs just take cars like normal people," Tony continued, grinning. "Since when have I ever done anything the normal way?" Amara laughed, following Marco to the helipad. The air was crisp, and the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades slicing through the air filled the space around them. It was a familiar soundtrack, one that Amara had grown accustomed to. She felt a rush of excitement as she walked across the tarmac, each step bringing her closer to the next chapter in her journey. As she approached the Bell 429, she felt a sense of calm. This was her element. Up here, above the noise and the chaos, she was in control. She was changing the game, one decision at a time. The helicopter's doors were open and ready. It was just another day at the office for Amara Reynolds. She climbed aboard, securing her seatbelt and putting on her headset. The engine hummed to life, and she pulled out her tablet one last time to review her presentation. Everything was perfect. Everything was routine. And then, without warning, everything changed. The first siren pierced the air, followed by another, and then another. The whine of police sirens grew louder, cutting through the sound of the helicopter's rotors. Amara looked out the window and saw a series of police cars racing toward the tarmac, their lights flashing and sirens wailing. They were not part of the usual helicopter traffic, and the sight made her stomach tighten. Something was wrong. The helicopter's lift was cut short as the vehicle settled back onto the landing pad, its rotor blades slowing to a stop. Through the window, Amara watched as the police cars surrounded them in a semicircle. Her heart raced as she waited for the officers to approach. Something had happened, and she had no idea what it was. Little did she know, this unexpected interruption would uncover a shocking truth, one that would change the course of her day, her business, and her life forever. The shocking truth. The police cars encircled the Bell 429, their bright blue and red lights flashing erratically against the clear morning sky. The sound of their sirens reverberated through the air, adding a layer of tension to the scene. For a moment, Amara Reynolds just stared out the window, confused, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't normal. This wasn't part of the routine. Marco's voice crackled through her headset, tight with uncertainty. Amara, stay calm. I'm going to see what's going on. His tone was calm, but she could hear the edge in it. He was always level-headed, a professional who had seen his fair share of chaotic situations. But even he couldn't hide the tension in his voice. Amara didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. The helicopter was still grounded, the engines idling as the rotor blades slowly spun to a halt. She could see the police officers now, emerging from their vehicles, their movements sharp and deliberate. They were headed toward the helicopter with purpose. It wasn't a routine check. This was something else. Marco, be careful, she said, her voice laced with concern. What's going on? Why are they surrounding us? Marco's footsteps crunched on the tarmac as he approached one of the officers. Amara could see him gesturing to the police officer, probably trying to explain that everything was in order, that they had all the necessary permits and paperwork for the flight. She could imagine the scene unfolding below her, Marco's calm professionalism contrasting with the authority of the officers. She had been in situations like this before, misunderstandings or bureaucratic errors, but this felt different. This felt personal. The moments stretched into what felt like hours as the officers gathered around Marco and began speaking in low voices. She could see the frustration on Marco's face as he gestured to her helicopter and the flight plan, his arms moving in sharp, deliberate motions. Amara's fingers drummed nervously against the edge of her tablet. She glanced out the window again, catching a glimpse of the officers walking toward her, their faces stern and unreadable. A sudden chill crept up her spine. The air seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She was the CEO of Orion Tech, the visionary behind one of the most groundbreaking tech companies of the decade. She had closed deals with some of the biggest names in the industry. She had fought harder than most to get to where she was, and now, standing in her own helicopter, she wasn't about to let anyone, especially the police, throw her off course. The cockpit door swung open, and Marco climbed back in, his face grim. He didn't immediately speak, his eyes darting between her and the officers still gathering below. What's going on? Amara asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Marco hesitated for a moment before responding. They're not letting us leave. They say we need to stay grounded for an investigation. An investigation? Amara's voice rose in disbelief. What kind of investigation? This is a private helicopter. We've done everything by the book. I know. But they're insisting. They're claiming there's some sort of security threat, Marco replied, his eyes filled with frustration. I've never seen anything like it. Amara leaned back in her seat, her mind spinning. A security threat? This didn't make sense. Everything about this was off, this level of intervention, the sudden, unwarranted blockade. For a moment, she considered whether this was some kind of mistake. A misunderstanding. But as the minutes ticked by, her instincts told her this wasn't some clerical error. This was deliberate. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her assistant, Tony. Are you all right? We're hearing reports of a police action at the heliport. There's a news crew nearby. Do you need help? Amara read the message twice, her stomach sinking. She hadn't realized the situation had escalated this much. The news? A police action? It was almost as if the entire situation was designed to humiliate her, to slow her down. She had dealt with setbacks before, critics, doubters, and those who wanted to see her fail. But this? This felt different. This felt personal. "Marco, keep your head down. I'm going to handle this," Amara said, her voice firm but with an undertone of controlled anger. She wasn't going to let anyone sabotage her day, not this close to the finish line. Without waiting for a response, she opened the cockpit door and stepped out onto the tarmac, the cool morning air greeting her like a slap to the face. The officers hadn't noticed her approach yet, their attention focused on Marco, who was now talking to one of the senior officers. She walked toward them, her steps deliberate and confident. She had learned to command a room, and she would do the same here. "Excuse me, officers," she called out as she neared the group. The words left her mouth with a calm, yet firm authority. "What's the meaning of this disruption? This is my helicopter, and I've cleared everything with the proper authorities." The officer in charge, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a sharp gaze, turned to face her. His eyes flickered with recognition. He must have heard of her, seen her name in the papers, or maybe even in industry circles. She wasn't a stranger to the public eye, after all. "We're sorry, Miss Reynolds, but we have reason to believe that there's a security risk involving your helicopter," the officer said, his tone clipped and professional. "We can't allow you to take off until we've completed our investigation." "Security risk?" Amara repeated, her voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "I don't know what this is about, but I assure you, this helicopter is fully licensed and all paperwork is in order." "I understand, Miss Reynolds," the officer replied, his tone softening slightly. "But we have orders to detain this aircraft. We received an anonymous tip that something illegal might be happening here today." "An anonymous tip?" Amara's pulse quickened. Her hands clenched at her sides. "You're telling me this is about an anonymous tip? That's your reason for grounding a private helicopter, in front of my business associates, disrupting everything?" "We're just following protocol," the officer said, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with the weight of the situation. Amara could feel the sting of indignation, the injustice of it all. She had worked so hard to get to this point, to build a company from the ground up. She had fought against every stereotype, every barrier, and now, it felt as though the world was conspiring to knock her down. "I understand you're just following orders, officer," she said, her voice cold and measured. "But I assure you, there's nothing illegal happening here. I am the CEO of Orion Tech. I'm on my way to a business meeting, one that could change the future of AI technology. I will not let this baseless investigation jeopardize that." There was a brief silence before the officer spoke again, his voice lower now, as if he were weighing his next words carefully. "Miss Reynolds, I'm afraid there's more to this than you realize." Amara frowned, her mind racing. What did he mean? What could be more to this than a simple misunderstanding? She had already proven herself, time and again, against every obstacle that had been thrown in her path. She wasn't about to let some vague threat, an anonymous tip, derail everything she had worked for. "Please explain what you mean," she said, her voice firm, though there was a flicker of concern behind her words. The officer hesitated for a moment, before glancing at his fellow officers, signaling for them to step back. He turned back to her, his expression now more serious. "There's a security breach we've been tracking for some time now, Miss Reynolds. A group has been targeting high-profile individuals in the tech industry, and your name came up in connection to them. We're investigating whether your company's resources are being used for something illegal." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just dealing with a random mistake. There was something much bigger at play here, something that threatened not only her business, but her personal safety as well. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She took a deep breath, her mind racing as she processed this new information. She had to stay calm. She couldn't let panic take over. "Fine," Amara said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'll cooperate fully. But this investigation will not stop me from going to that meeting today. My team has worked too hard, and this deal is too important to allow it to be derailed by baseless accusations." The officer nodded, though there was still an air of uncertainty surrounding him. He wasn't convinced. But neither was she. Understood, he said. We'll have to hold the helicopter for further inspection. We'll be in touch. Amara gave a sharp nod, turning back toward Marco, who was watching the exchange from a distance. Her mind was already calculating her next move. She couldn't let this setback stop her. Not today. Not when everything she had worked for was on the line. She wasn't just fighting for her company anymore. She was fighting for the truth. The unexpected ally. Amara stood still for a moment as the reality of the officer's words sank in. They were accusing her, or at least implying that her company was involved in something criminal, based on an anonymous tip. She had worked tirelessly to build Orion Tech into the powerhouse it had become, to break barriers and prove her worth in a world that didn't always see her as equal. And now, it seemed, everything she had fought for was on the verge of being torn down by a whisper, by a rumor she didn't even understand. She glanced back at Marco, who was still talking with the officers, his hands raised in a gesture of calm but visible frustration. Marco had always been a steady presence, and if there was anyone who could keep things from escalating further, it was him. But Amara knew this situation was beyond his control. This wasn't just about a grounded helicopter anymore. This was about her reputation, her company's future, and perhaps most disturbing of all, the shadowy forces that had decided to target her. As she turned back to the officers, her mind raced. She couldn't afford to let them keep her grounded for long. Every second wasted meant lost opportunities, missed deals, broken momentum. And she had worked too hard to let it all slip away due to an unfounded accusation. She took a steadying breath, forcing her emotions into check. Calm, she told herself. Stay calm. There was no room for panic. Officer, she said, her voice even, though there was a quiet strength behind it, I understand you're doing your job, but I assure you, my company and I are not involved in any illegal activities. You've seen the papers, you've checked the records. You know my background. This is a waste of your time. What's really going on here? The officer stared at her for a moment, as if weighing her words. He seemed reluctant to speak, but after a long pause, he finally sighed. Miss Reynolds, I wish I could tell you more, but we've been instructed to hold your helicopter. We're working on something much larger, and right now, your name has come up in connection to an investigation we can't discuss further. Amara's heart skipped a beat, but she masked her surprise. Larger? What did that even mean? What was this all about? Her instincts told her that this wasn't about just her company, it wasn't about just a misunderstanding or a mix-up. This was far more personal. Someone had targeted her specifically, and she had no idea why. The officer, seeing the growing tension in her eyes, added, Look, I know this is frustrating, but we're just following orders. It's not our choice. Amara nodded slowly, trying to keep her mind from racing, trying to hold on to the last threads of control. She had faced adversity before, obstacles that seemed insurmountable, challenges that felt like they would break her. But every single time, she had found a way to break through, to come out on top. This would be no different. Let's get one thing straight, Amara said, her voice sharper now, filled with the resolve she had cultivated over years of being underestimated. No one derails me. No one stops me from doing what I've worked my entire life to achieve. If you're going to hold me back, you'd better have a damn good reason. For a moment, the officer didn't respond. He seemed to consider her words, his face unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he stepped back, nodding to one of the younger officers beside him. The younger officer looked at her briefly, his eyes a mix of confusion and curiosity. Stay here, the officer said to Marco, before walking back toward the line of vehicles. Marco turned to Amara, his brow furrowed, clearly frustrated but not entirely surprised. He had seen Amara in action many times before, but even he knew that this was a new level of pressure. Amara turned to look at him, giving him a brief nod. Stay calm. This will be sorted out. Just keep an eye on things. Marco hesitated, his eyes scanning the surroundings before he finally nodded in agreement. Amara turned back to the helicopter, watching as the officers spoke in hushed voices among themselves. Something was happening here, something much bigger than they had let on. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was in the midst of a conspiracy, though she couldn't yet see the full picture. She'd learned early on that business was all about playing the long game, and that the best way to deal with a crisis was to stay one step ahead of it. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was Tony, her assistant. "There's a journalist at the heliport, Amara. They're saying that police are blocking your flight and they're asking questions. Do you need me to handle the press?" Amara swiped at her screen, typing quickly, "No. Keep them in check. I don't need the media stirring things up. I'll handle this." She paused, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her. Everything was slipping out of her control, and that wasn't something she was used to. But as the minutes dragged on, and she stood there in the harsh sunlight, her mind continued to race, trying to piece together what had happened and why. And then, out of nowhere, a familiar face appeared from the crowd of officers. It was a woman, mid-30s, tall, with dark brown hair pulled into a ponytail. She wasn't wearing a uniform, but the way she carried herself, the way she moved, told Amara immediately that this woman was someone important. The woman approached her, and for the first time since the chaos had started, Amara felt a slight sense of relief. She recognized her immediately, though they had never spoken before. It was Sarah Mitchell, a former government cybersecurity expert who had become a high-profile consultant for various tech companies, including some of Amara's competitors. "Miss Reynolds," Sarah said, her voice warm but tinged with urgency. "I don't know if you remember me, but we've met a couple of times at tech conferences. I think I can help with this." Amara felt her breath catch in her throat. Of all the people she could have run into today, Sarah Mitchell, someone who operated in the shadows of the tech world, often on the wrong side of the law, was one of the last people she expected. But her presence here felt like fate, a strange twist that could either save her or make the situation even worse. "Sarah," Amara said, trying to hide her surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because I know you're being targeted, Amara," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the officers and the helicopter. "I've been watching the investigation unfold from behind the scenes. Someone has set you up. They've planted information about your company to make it look like you're involved in something illegal, but I can tell you right now, it's all a lie." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. "A lie? But who would do that? Why?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Sarah said. "But there's a pattern here. The same people who've been targeting other CEOs in the tech world, people like you, people with power and influence, are the ones behind this. And now they've set their sights on you." For a moment, Amara didn't know how to respond. Her mind was racing, trying to process everything Sarah had just said. Could it be true? Could someone be targeting her like this? Was she really in danger? Before Amara could ask another question, Sarah leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I can help you clear your name, but you need to trust me. Time is running out. These people will stop at nothing to destroy you. You can't fight them alone." Amara stood there, feeling a mix of disbelief and determination. She had fought so hard to get here, to build her empire, and now it felt as if someone was trying to tear it all down with a single, unverified accusation. But she wasn't the kind of person who backed down, not from anyone or anything. "I'll do whatever it takes," Amara said, her voice filled with resolve. "We're getting to the bottom of this, and I'm not letting anyone stop me." Sarah gave a sharp nod, her eyes narrowing with focus. "Good. Let's go. We have work to do." The truth unveiled. Amara stood in the glaring sun, her heart pounding in her chest as Sarah Mitchell's words echoed in her mind. "They've set their sights on you." The realization hit her hard, this wasn't just an isolated incident. There was a deeper conspiracy at play, one that had targeted her and her company, and now it seemed like the pieces were finally starting to fall into place. She had always been able to navigate the volatile world of business with ease. Nothing had ever truly rattled her before. But this was different. This wasn't about just closing deals or outsmarting competitors. This was about her entire legacy, everything she had built and fought for, now hanging by a thread. Sarah's appearance was both a surprise and a lifeline. Amara's mind swirled with questions. How did Sarah know what was happening? Why had she chosen to step in now? But there was no time to waste. Amara had to keep moving forward. She had to clear her name and protect her company, even if it meant diving into a world of secrets she had never imagined. Let's get to the bottom of this, Amara said, her voice filled with determination. She turned to Marco, who had been watching their exchange from a distance, his expression unreadable. Marco, stay close. If things go south, I'll need you to back me up. Marco nodded, his face hardening with resolve. He had been with her through thick and thin, and no matter how dangerous this situation became, she knew she could count on him. Sarah led them to a private area at the heliport, away from the growing crowd of officers and onlookers. She motioned for Amara and Marco to follow her. As they walked, Sarah spoke quietly, as if the walls had ears. Amara, I know this must be overwhelming, Sarah began. But you need to understand, this isn't just a random attack on your company. There are forces at work here, powerful people who've been systematically targeting tech executives like you. And they've used every tool at their disposal to frame you. Amara's mind reeled. Targeting tech executives? But why? What do they want? The short answer is control, Sarah replied, her voice grave. There's a hidden network of powerful investors and government entities who've been manipulating the tech industry for years. They want to keep the biggest breakthroughs in their hands, and anyone who challenges that system, like you, with your AI chips, becomes a threat. Amara's stomach churned. She had built Orion Tech to bring innovation to the masses, to break down barriers in the tech world and make powerful technology accessible to smaller companies. But now, it seemed, her success had made her a target. They feared what I could do if I succeed, she thought bitterly. But why frame me? Amara asked. Why go through the trouble of planting false evidence and turning the police against me? Because you're a symbol, Sarah explained. A symbol of everything they fear. You're not just a CEO. You're a trailblazer, someone who's risen against the odds, someone who's defied every stereotype in their playbook. And they want to stop that. They don't want other women, especially women of color, to think they can do the same. The weight of Sarah's words hit Amara like a slap to the face. She had known her journey wasn't easy, but she had never imagined it would come to this, her very existence in the tech world being seen as a challenge to the status quo. Still, it made sense. Everything she had done had upset the traditional balance of power. Her story wasn't supposed to be one of success, not for someone like her. Who's behind this? Amara asked, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to remain composed. Sarah hesitated before answering. A consortium of shadowy figures, investors, certain factions within the government, and people in positions of power who benefit from the status quo. They've been quietly pushing their own agendas for years. They're the ones who've been feeding false information to the media and manipulating the narrative about you. Amara felt the anger rise in her chest. She had spent years building her reputation, fighting against the constant undermining, proving that she belonged in spaces that weren't designed for her. But now, it seemed, the fight had grown much larger, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. They've already planted the seed, Sarah continued. The police action today, the rumors about your company's supposed illegal activities, they're all part of a larger scheme. The goal is to discredit you, to make you a pariah, so that your company loses investors, partnerships, and public trust. And once you're on the defensive, they'll swoop in and take control of your company. Amara felt her blood boil. This was no longer just a matter of clearing her name. This was about her freedom, her ability to create change. They weren't just attacking her, they were trying to take away everything she had worked for. I'm not going to let them get away with this, Amara said, her voice resolute. We need to go on the offensive. Sarah nodded. That's exactly what we're going to do. I've been gathering intel on the people behind this. I've got contacts who can help us expose the truth. But we need to move quickly. Once the investigation goes public, it'll be harder to control the narrative. We need to find out who's pulling the strings, before they can bury us. The urgency in Sarah's voice hit Amara like a wave. She didn't have much time. But she wasn't going to back down. This was her fight, and she wasn't going to let anyone take what she had built. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and strategic planning. With Sarah's help, Amara was able to get in touch with a few trusted allies in the tech world, people who owed her favors or who believed in her vision. They quickly began to work behind the scenes, gathering evidence, tracking down leads, and figuring out who was behind the false allegations. It wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about exposing the entire network of people who had been working in the shadows to keep power in the hands of the few. By the time the evening sun began to set, Amara had a plan. She was going to confront her accusers head-on and reveal the truth to the world. But she needed one final piece of evidence, something undeniable that would bring the whole conspiracy into the light. That's it, Amara said, her voice steady but filled with a sense of purpose. I know who's behind this. And I know exactly how to take them down. With the evidence in hand, Amara was ready. She had fought too hard to get to this point, and she wasn't about to let anyone take her down without a fight. The game had changed, and now, she was playing by her own rules. The next day, the world would know the truth. And Amara Reynolds would rise higher than ever before.